we good? Yeah, okay. Mm, let's see. Uh, okay. May not be good, so I need to turn off that. Uh, yeah. Okay, let me turn on my VPN. I think it should be better. Maybe. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. I, yeah. Okay.
JC staff to see the people making it, how it was being made, and really ask the questions I always wanted to know about what goes into making an anime adaptation. So I'm here right now at JC staff, and I'm going to be walking through the entire process of Combatants Will Be Dispatched. Now, walking me through the studio will be the anime producer himself.
JC スタッフの、プロデューサーやってます藤代と申します。よろしくお願いします。会社によっても役割は違ってくると思うんですけど、うちの会社の場合は、実際に作品が動いて、納品するまでのそのプロセスを、実際に監督とどういう絵作りをしていくかであったりとか、あとはメーカーさんの方とどういうスケジュールで作っていくかっていったところのそのクオリティとそのスケジュールっていったところを、管理する立場の人間になりますね。じゃあお願いします。作画部にはこういった形でデジタルで描いていることを、昔からのその紙で描いているその2つのやり方が分かれてるんですけれども、彼女はデジタルの方で描いてるから、実際、この辺がレイアウト、ラフ原って言われているその下書きの段階での、作家さんであったり総作家さんであったりの修正を載せてもらった後にクリーンアップ清書する作業を、やってた感じですね。
戦闘員派遣します、アニメーション監督やってます赤木弘明と申します。
So, what's your role as an animation director, or just a director of an anime, I should say?
コーディネート的な感じですかね。各セクションいろいろ個性的なキャラクターデザインや、色彩とかいろいろ撮影さんの、各のちょっと個性とかありますんで、その辺をうまくこっちの方の僕のその映像的な要素をうまく、一緒に取り入れていくような形のコーディネート的な役割だと思ってます。
さっき見てもらったこのカット116のカットを今度動画で中を割っていくと、先ほどのは原画だったんですけれども、その原画と原画の間の絵を埋めていくっていうのが動画の作業になりますね。最終的にア アニメの動きになるのはこの動画の作業になる。これがまあタイムシートと言われるものなんですけれども、原画になるのがこの丸がついている番号のところが原画なんですね。でこの間の点が埋めた動画の作業になる。でさらにそれが番号がつくとこういう番号になってくるんですけれども、でもちろん原画の部分も再度動画でトレスをし直すんですが、ここの間の原画と原画の間ですね、ここの作業を全部埋めていくというのが動画の作業なんです。なので原画だとまあ1、2、3、4、5枚なんですけれども、動画にすると14枚全部埋めると作業が発生する。
You obviously have choice in what anime productions you choose to accept. What led you to choose this particular anime production?
そうですね、これちょっと難しいんですけれども、もともと角川さんからそういったご依頼が、うちの会社の方にありまして、でうちの会社の場合はプロデューサーが、5人プラスその5人のプロデューサーを統括する人間で松倉というのがいるんですけれども、基本的に松倉がその作品のうちの会社で何をやるかっていったところのその管理をしてるんですね。でその松倉とその角川さんとのところで、じゃあ戦闘員派遣しますという依頼が来ました。でこのスケジュールでこういう内容でじゃあぜひやりましょうといったところの話があったところで、その現場の方にこのタイトルをじゃあうちの会社でやろうと思うといったところで、じゃあスタッフリングをどうしようかっていったところが僕のところに来て、そこで松倉と僕とでじゃあこういうスタッフリングでこういうテイストでやっていきましょうかっていう話し合いが行われて、現状の座組というか、スタッフでやる形になりました。
So now we're going to the actual hand-drawn parts. That was the digital department. So now we're going to see anime was drawn by good old pen and paper.
同じく戦闘員派遣しますなんですけれども、これが原画、さっきはデジタルでしたけど、これはもう手書きのものになりますね。実際にこれちょっと別の方が作業されたラフになるんですけれども、その上にこういう形で作家さんの修正が乗っかって、さらに、総作家さんの修正が乗っかる。でこの修正に合わせて作業するとこういう形の原画の作業になるという感じですね。
Were there any challenges in adapting a light novel as opposed to a manga or any other kind of source material?
そうですね、ドラゴンボールとかワンピースみたいに30クール40クールあればいいんですけど、ワンクールなんで、小説のすべてをちょっとすべてのことはできない、その時間的制約があるんで、そこら辺のところをうまくオミットして、ブリッジしていくっていう役割で、ちょっとそういう難しさもあったんですけど、そこも楽しさでもあったかなとは思います。
How does each animator choose which cuts that they get?
基本的には根底があるので、絵コンテがあるので、それに沿う形になるんで、自由度で言ったらそんなにないかなという感じですね。ただその絵コンテの中で自分がどのシーンを描きたいかみたいなところが原画さんに選んでもらったりとか、制作であったりプロデューサーがこのシーンはぜひこの人に描いてもらいたいですみたいな形で、選んだりはしますね。
What factors goes into choosing the exact titles that will get animated here at JC Staff?
うち基準で選定っていうのはそこまで多くないんですけれども、大体今ありがたいことに各メーカーさんから企画という形でこのタイトルを御社でぜひという形の方が多いので、それを企画の依頼が来た時に改めてじゃあどのタイトルならっていったところであったりとか、当然そのやれる本数、作品の本数も限りがあるので、同じ時期に複数タイトルが来た時にじゃあ実際にその時期にできるのがどれなのかみたいなところは各メーカーさんと、先ほどちょっと申し上げた松倉との話の中で話し合われたりとか、実際現場の方にこのタイトルをこのタイミングでやらないかという話が来てるけれどもどう思うっていう振られる時もあるので、それはぜひやりましょうであったりとか、やらせてくださいであったりとか、ちょっとその時期だと厳しいと思いますっていうその現場の状況であったりとかなんで、単純にタイトルの面白い面白くないっていうことではなくて、もちろんそれもあるんですけれども、 社内の状況であったりとか、今これをやるべきなのかであったりとか、あとはうちは割と多いんですけれども、1期目をやったら次のぜひ継続してこの作品をやってくださいという話が割と多いんですね。そうすると予定してたところにそれが入ると、じゃあまたずらさなければいけない、そういうそのコントロールみたいのが発生してしまうので、そこをうまくスケジューリング年間通して、今ですと2023年ぐらいまではタイトルはほぼ決まってる感じですね。2年後ぐらいまでは決まってますね。それはもうやっぱりキャラクターをどれだけ寄せられるかっていったところであったりとか、特に1話なんでこのキャラクターがどういう性格でどういう表情をするんだろうっていったところは割とやっぱり創作官さんの幅にもよりますし、監督とそこは相談して決めていく。特に1話はそこら辺が難しいですね。このキャラクターは本当にこういう表情をするんだろうかとか、この場合はどういう動きをするんだろうみたいなところの決め込みみたいなのがやっぱり難しくなってくるかなと思いますね。
So does that mean if it's a light novel adaptation, you're given more freedom to put your own vision into it? Because with the manga, it's obviously drawn and it's almost like a storyboard already.
さほどはないですね。やはり続きものだったらするんで、キャラのその動線や感情線っていうのはやっぱりそう自由にはできないと思うので、その辺は先生ともいろいろ話し合って、このキャラクターはこういうのなんですよ、この流れでいきますっていうのを常に話し合っていきました。ただ自由っていうとアリスが持ってる双眼鏡なんですけど、これ自分が持ってた双眼鏡のこのちっちゃい可愛いのがあるんですけど、これをなんか使わせていただきたのが自由かなっていう。ちなみにその双眼鏡がなくしちゃったんですけど、誰か見つけてもらったらこう届けてもらえると。
ここは全体的に作画部のフロアでお願いします。
So we're heading into the background department now. We've gone to a completely different floor. So let's see what they're up to here.
ワンフレームではなくてカメラがこうパンすることによって長くなったりとか、そうすると大変ですね。
So per episode, you can get between 300 to 400 backgrounds per episode. How long does it usually take to do one single background?
内容によって全くすぐに終わってしまうものもあれば、1日がかりとかそういったものもあります。
An hour or two to an entire day per background. And they only appear on screen for a few seconds as well, so that's a really short time for the amount of effort you're putting in per background. Can I ask which one was the most difficult background to draw for the episode that he's worked on?
レイヤーがカメラが動くことによって奥と手前でそのカメラのその深度が違うので素材を分けなければいけないんですね。そうするとこういう形でいくつもレイヤーを作って、ブックと言われるものなんですけれども、作業するとちょっと時間かかるかな。
What reference material do you use to make the backgrounds?
今回は美術設定の段階で監督から、割とその乾いた土地なので、そういった建物のその参考資料を監督からいただきましたね。それを元に書いてますね。
I didn't realize how much work went into the backgrounds of the shows. Not many people talk about background artists as opposed to actual animators, so this is actually really interesting to me. How many background artists do you have working on one episode normally?
5人です。
5 people, just 5. In JC staff, they have 5 people working on backgrounds, which it's not a lot for the amount of backgrounds they need to draw per episode. My God. Before adapting an anime, how much research do you as a director have to put into the source material?
いや、それはもう本当に受験勉強並みにやりましたね。このマーカーつけて重要なところがパッと見てすぐここの重要なところは見えるようにしてるっていう、常にこう参考書みたいな。
So I'm curious because obviously, most people in anime industry are like a fan of anime and manga. Is reading a light novel for preparation for work different to you than just reading just to enjoy?
かなり違いますね。やっぱりこう一言一句見逃せないっていう感じがあるんで、その辺はかなり違うと思います。やっぱり仕事になりますね。
ちなみにちょっと紹介しなかったんですけど、こっち側は3D。
そう。
戦闘員派遣しますはあんまり 3D そこまで対応してないんですけれども、 こっち側にあるのが 3D の部署になりますね。
One thing that I've always wondered is for me as an overseas fan, the Japanese companies made anime for Japanese people and that was sold overseas, but it feels like recently the overseas fan has a bigger voice here in Japan. For yourself, do you take overseas fans into account at all whenever making a product, or is that something you don't consider at all?
そこまで正直大きな影響は受けてはないですね。やっぱり昔からのその作り方、アニメの作り方、日本のアニメの作り方がやっぱりその海外にも評価されてきたというのもあるので、そこに対して逆にじゃあ作り方を変えていこうというよりは、今まで通りのその作り方で、もちろん意識はしますけれども、何かその特別に変えたりっていったところはあまりはしてないですね。
What goes into choosing the color of each scene and the characters?
戦闘員派遣しますの場合は、もともと原作の絵があって、原作の表紙であったりとか色味があるので、そこをどういうふうにアニメの中で近づけていくかっていった作業ですね。でそれを実際監督に見てもらって、ちょっと後でお見せするので、色味チェックっていう形で、先ほど背景を案内したんですけれども、背景の色の上にキャラクターを乗っけて実際の、世界観であったりとかそういったところの整合性を取っていくと。
That reference sheet over there, who made that reference sheet?
であれがもう色指定表という形で、どこの部分を何色に塗るかという指定になるので、実際塗るときにあそこから、引っ張ってくるというか色を決めていく感じですね。範囲を決めてこの色はここみたいな形でやっていく感じです。
So does every other colorist have to follow her reference sheets?
やっぱり塗りの作業も何千枚もあるので、海外に巻いたり国内社内でやったりといったところにこの指定表の指示に従って色を塗っていくという形、こういう形で設定に色をこういう感じですね。背景の上にキャラクターを乗っけて色をチェックする。でこれを監督に見てもらって、もう少し髪の毛の色を明るくしようかとか暗くしようかとかいう作業をする。話数によって時間帯が違ったりとか天気が違ったりとかすると、ちょっと肌の色変えなければいけないとかになると、そこの色味をまた変えたものを随時チェックして作っていく。一番ベースなのは最初に本当に作るかなんですね。おちんちん祭り。
Are there any new specific challenges you found doing Combatants Will Be Dispatched?
久しぶりにその SF めいたものっていうのはなかったんで、作品的にも減ってるとは思うんで、その辺のものですかね。やっぱりそれこそ昔見た特撮めいたものもジャンル的にはあるし、SF 昔見たような僕が楽しんで見てた SF 的な要素もあるっていうので、そういうところの気づきっていうか、こういうのをそういえば楽しんで見ていたなっていうのがあって、そういうのをうまく取り入れて皆さんに楽しめたらいいなっていうのがありました。
こちらが戦闘員派遣しますのオープニングのカットの撮影をちょっと今からお見せしようと思いますので。
What's this stage of the process called?
デジタル作業になる前、セル画という、セル作業の時に実際に撮影者がそのカメラを台を置いてカメラで撮ってる作業だったので、その昔の作業の名残というかそのままの呼び方で見ます。確かに撮影っていうとカメラがいっぱいあるんじゃないかというふうに思われるんですけれども、実際はもうパソコンで作業してる。今そのパソコン上でカメラワークみたいなのつけてたんですけれども、昔のこのより引きはこういう台の上でできたんですけど、その横に振ったりみたいなところは実際手でこうセルを動かしたりみたいなのもやってましたね、昔。
Well, is this part of the process where you sync it to the voice as well, and the voice acting and the sound effects?
理想はこの作業が終わってからやることが理想なんですけれども、どうしても今スケジュールの関係で並行作業になってしまうので、もっと前の段階で本当にコンテの絵でアフレコをしたりとか、ラフ弦の絵で音をつけたり効果音をつけたりっていう作業は現状ありますね。
Since the sound effects and voice is done such early stage, is it sometimes hard to sync it up, or is there any problems when it comes to this stage?
あります。キャストの方の声の入れ方、その声量であったりとか、その表現の仕方で口の大きさが合わないとか 表情が違うとかいったところが発生してしまうこともあるので、なので途中の音のデータはもらうので途中で修正はしていくんですけれども、最終的に出来上がった絵と声を合わせてみてやっぱり違うなっていう時はあるので、そういった時は絵の方を修正したりします。
The comedy timing, the comedy style was obviously very similar to Konosuba because it's the same author. So I was curious how much, if you took any inspiration from Konosuba's adaptation when doing this as well.
実はこのそば作ってる時に横で一緒に別なタイトルを落語真珠っていうのを作品を逆に作ってたんですけど、落語真珠っていうのはちょっと繊細な感じの作品で、隣でこのそばのラッシュなんかを聞くとわちゃわちゃわーわー、スタッフも笑っているところが、こっちは落語を聞いて笑えるか笑えないような落語を聞いてしみみにしていたところで、このそばっていう作品はみんなスタッフをラッシュしてるとみんな笑って笑顔で見てるんですね。そういうところの憧れっていうのはちょっとあったんで、その作品に挑むところでそういうやっぱりみんな楽しめたらいいなっていうのがありました。アフレコとかそのラッシュでやっぱり笑いが起こるっていうのがあって、そういうところではちょっと良かったなって、伝わってるんだなっていうのがあって、ちょっと安心してます。
I'm curious because it is a comedy show. Because you have to see a scene a lot of times, like during production, is there a time where you have a joke, but because you've seen it so many times, you are worried that you don't find it funny anymore, but people around you will still find it funny?
全くありますね。もうその通り。
So when you're adapting a piece of work, how much contact do you have with the original author, or how much say did they have to influence the final anime?
ありましたね、もちろん。かなりそれこそ1話なんかっていう要素では、原作にない部分とかありましたんで、そのベリアルの描き方とか、6号のちょっとしたニュアンスっていうのは先生が書き加えてもらったっていうのがあったりしてます。で、逆にそういう人物だったのかっていうのが見えて、以後の、制作にもすごい役立ってましたね。
Do you have any message you have to any fans who are watching Combatants Will Be Dispatched right now?
楽しんでいただけると助かるんですが、どうか寝ないように作ってますんで、楽しんでください。
And that was my day there. Huge thank you to the people at JC Staff for letting me go there and showing me around. And of course, thank you to Katakawa for giving me the opportunity to go to an anime studio. Like, what? Initially, I did want this to be a much bigger project, going through the entire life cycle and showing you guys how a title like this gets picked up from being a web novel to a light novel to a manga and eventually an anime adaptation. But unfortunately, due to us being in lockdown right now, none of the staff members or authors or editors could be scheduled for an interview, understandably so. But maybe in the future, I'll get another opportunity to be able to show you guys the entire life cycle behind your favorite anime being made. Combatants Will Be Dispatched is airing right now. You can watch it on Funimation, Wakanime, and Anime Lab, depending on where in the world you're situated in. And of course, you can even pick up the light novel and also the manga. Yes, these are available physically, but you can also read them digitally right now on Daddy Bookwalker. This video was technically sponsored by
秘密がありそうです。
今どういうことを言われたんですか？
立ち位置でそこから見えるパースがちょっと違ってるっていうのと、あとコンテで意図したアングルじゃなかったって忘れちゃいました。若干上の方から撮ってて、実際はちょっと煽って下から見た方がいいよっていうところですね。あと と立ち位置の関係上目線がこっちに行ってなきゃいけないというこっちの方に向かってるっていうので。
ああ、なるほど。
そうですね。
こっちは真ん中に目線がいってるんですか。
そうですね。こっちに目標があって立ち位置、この位置関係上こっちに目標があるっていうのだったんですけど、自分はこっちだったんですね。こっちも行っちゃってるしカメラが上にいるっていう。
暴れるドラゴンを見上げる先生、その奥に並ぶアッコたち。複数のキャラクターのやり取りをスムーズな流れで見せるためには、それぞれの位置関係をしっかりと理解しておく必要があります。はい、じゃあ頼んだわよ。先ほど吉成監督が描いていた図はそのためのもの。5人のキャラクターと4台のカメラの位置関係が描かれています。カット268はドラゴンと先生の間にカメラがあるので目線は右側が正解。263のカメラ位置は遠目の真横なのでほとんど角度がつきません。269はやや奥からのカメラ、先生の体は斜めになります。271だけは実は嘘をついています。わかりますか？こうした配置図を頭の中でイメージしながら描くこと、これもアニメーターに求められる基本スキルなのです。
それを言われたら、あ、その通りだと思うものなんですか。
そうですね。言われるまで気づかないのが恐ろしいですね。
うまくなるとそれは分かるものなんですか。
いや、分かるんじゃないですかね。つながってみないと自分には分からないですね。
作画の部分に非常に大きく影響してくる部分ですので、共通項目も多いんじゃないかなと思います。はいね、
講義の後は撮影実習へ出発。一人一台カメラを下げて近所の神社で撮影会です。唯一安心できる状態なのはミノタウルスのシーン一連。原画経験1年の金子さんが担当した部分です。リトルウィッチチームは午後2時出社がルール。ほとんど誰もいないスタジオに金子さんの姿がありました。
Once we've done the computer graphics on the screen, the computer, with a ballpoint pen and a mechanical hand, draws what was on the screen onto an animation piece of paper. And it'll come out with a drawing that looks like this. And with a new piece of paper, I'll put on top of this, and I'll draw Basil running for his life on the gears. So it makes a nice hybrid between computer graphics and character animation.
Hybrid animation. The blending of 3D computer-generated imagery and traditional hand-drawn cartoons. It's a technique that's been around for quite a while now. The Great Mouse Detective released in 1986, and it's often credited as the first notable example of it. But when it comes to discourse on the internet, the term hybrid animation didn't really pop up until recent years. And there's a very good reason for that. This movie was not the first use of CGI in a cartoon. In fact, it's not even the first use of CGI in a Disney cartoon. But what The Great Mouse Detective represented was a leap forward. It proved to Hollywood directors and the general movie-going audience of 1986 that computer graphics were more than just a gimmick. At least it could have, if anybody could tell it was there, but hey, that was always the goal. Audiences weren't supposed to notice. The critics could tell that something was better about this movie, but it wasn't entirely clear to them why. In Roger Ebert's highly positive review, he stated, "Computers have taken most of the drudgery and much of the expense out of animation, and the result is a movie like The Great Mouse Detective, which looks more fully animated than anything in some 30 years." And he was completely wrong. Well, okay, the movie did look pretty incredible, but it wasn't because computers magically made life easier. If anything, they made things significantly more challenging for the animators, but the results speak for themselves.
We could then move through the set just like a live action camera could do, or even more like a helicopter can do. So when the characters are running like this up the gear, the camera's panning and moving along with them in tremendous kind of shots that aren't normally possible in an animated picture.
CGI was only used during the climax in the clock tower, which comprised just under 2 minutes of the total runtime. And aside from the gears, the rest of the movie was animated by hand, drawn with pencil and paper, with physical ink and paint on animation cells. It was about as old school as it got. At the time, this was Disney's second most expensive animated film ever produced, and had been in development for over 4 years. To say that the drudgery and expense was taken out of animation goes to show that most people didn't really understand where computers fit in the artistic process. In Ebert's defense, this was 1986, a time where the vast majority of people had never used a computer, so the marketing gimmick of computer animation was just futuristic enough to go right over everybody's heads. And you would think that after nearly 40 years, general audiences would finally understand how artists and animators use computers, but these tools are more misunderstood now than they've ever been. Hybridizing CGI into hand-animated movies became a staple technique for studios throughout the rest of the 80s and 90s, but the goal was always to try and make it invisible, to make the two styles match as closely as possible, so it makes a lot of sense that the layman would have a hard time noticing it. There isn't a single agreed-upon definition for hybrid animation, but as I see it, it's simply the blending of 2D and 3D techniques into one piece of media. Evidently, it's been around for quite a while, but people are treating it like it's a recent development. And if you read the title of this video, you probably already know why that is. Hey, we're gonna get to you, just give me a minute. Or 7-ish. So let's go back to 1986. Even if critics and audiences didn't understand why, the general consensus back then, and even today, was that The Great Mouse Detective was pretty good.
Hey fellas, I'll take all my blues.
Why, yes, that is a burlesque show that devolves into a drunken bar fight in a G-rated Disney cartoon. After 2 back-to-back box office losses, The Great Mouse Detective finally managed to turn a profit, and was considered by historians to be the movie that saved the company's floundering animation division. Jeffrey Katzenberg, the newly appointed business lead of said division, who was considered by myself to suck, threatened to shutter the whole thing if this movie wasn't a financial success. Fortunately, it was. But the studio wouldn't have been in this precarious state if it weren't for the sad financial disaster that was their prior release.
Walt Disney Pictures presents The Black.
Disney went to great lengths to get this movie produced on 70mm film, so we are gonna need a bigger screen. Released only a year earlier, this was Disney's most expensive movie to date, and adjusted for inflation, it's... Oh, okay, actually, that's pretty normal for an animated movie these days. But it was completely unheard of for 1985, and I definitely think it shows. Black Cauldron's animation, visual effects, and detailed backdrops are gorgeous, and in spite of that, this film was considered by historians to be poo-poo and doo-doo, thanks to some mediocre performances and discount Lord of the Rings fantasy writing. I know this movie has a bit of a cult following these days, but most people know it as The Bad One. And that really is a bummer, because it broke ground by being the first American cartoon to use CGI in its production. It also has Disney's whiniest protagonist,
Is this to be my life?
a
Alice.
magic fortune-telling pig, and Gurgi. So I can kind of see where both sides are coming from. While The Black Cauldron's use of hybrid animation wasn't nearly as impressive as The Great Mouse Detective's, the computer imagery on display here was still ahead of its time, mainly because they didn't try to make it obvious that it was even there. In fact, the B-roll that I've been playing for the last 15 to 20 seconds or so contained almost every hybrid CGI shot that made its way into the movie. Did you notice? I bet you didn't. But sometimes you have the exact opposite goal. Tron was a live-action movie from 1982 that was enhanced with CGI visuals that they took the pleasure of shoving right in your face. But that was always the goal. They wanted it to be obvious that it was there, and the story was written to facilitate that. The characters were in a computery world, so naturally the world looked computery. And for the time period, it was unique and novel. There really was nothing else like it. And while groundbreaking, it was considered by historians to give me a headache. Blending animation with live-action footage is a topic worth exploring all on its own, but I specifically want to focus on the merging of 3D CGI with hand-drawn 2D techniques. The reason I mentioned Tron is because in the 1980s, when people heard CGI, they thought of this, not this. The way The Great Mouse Detective and Black Cauldron were able to blend their use of computer animation so seamlessly is through a technique called rotoscoping, which is the act of meticulously tracing over source material frame by frame. Studios would implement this when they wanted to add a level of realism to their cartoons. In both movies, they specifically used it on complex shapes that needed to be viewed in motion, the exact sort of thing that would have been a nightmare to animate by hand. Back in the day, precise, sharp angles were the exact kind of thing that computers excelled at rendering. That's why they wanted CGI to enhance the hand-drawn animation instead of replace it. But Disney wasn't the first studio to make use of computers, and they weren't the only ones innovating in the 80s. Golgo 13, The Professional, was a Japanese movie from 1983 with an intro sequence that is considered by historians to have cool skeletons with guns. It's also thought to be the first time 3D CGI was integrated into a traditionally animated movie, and if you look real close, you might be able to spot where. As an animator and visual effects expert, I've spent hours analyzing this scene, and I'm pretty sure the CGI parts are the parts that look like it.
Americans. Americans!
If you Google hybrid animation, you'll probably see lists with a bunch of modern 3D animated movies that incorporate some hand-drawn elements, like Into the Spider-Verse, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and The Bad Guys. In fact, CBR.com, which as far as I can tell is just BuzzFeed
Happens every
for
day.
nerds, has a list called Every Hybrid 2D 3D Animated Movie Ranked according to Rotten Tomatoes. It has 9 examples, the oldest one is from 2012, and 3 of them aren't even movies. Geez, not even going to put the Iron Giant on here, huh? And look, I'm not stupid. I know that one listicle doesn't represent the general public sentiment, but for as much innovation as we've seen in the 3D animation space in the past few years, it's a little frustrating to see people act like studios haven't been trying to innovate with visuals up until recently.
What?
But I kind of understand.
Why would America be overpopulated? Really? There's no way. Is it? Underpopulate. Yeah, underpopulation, not over.
Understand why. As CGI started to overtake hand-drawn animation's dwindling presence in the box office, it was getting difficult to keep track of who made what. In the early days, the average moviegoer would see a trailer for a new 3D animated film, and mentally they'd either put it in the Pixar bucket or the DreamWorks bucket. Kind of like how your grandma called every video game console a Game Boy or a Nintendo. That was a bad take, cut that out. To the average, uneducated viewer, things had started to feel a little samey. There were obviously going to be outliers, but nothing your grandma was going to watch. So when something came out that was completely unique, that didn't look like anything else, and existed within an established intellectual property that people already liked, that got everybody's attention. This is why everything changed in 2018 when Into the Spider-Verse released. Well, once it hit Netflix. It was a bit of a box office sleeper when compared to all the other Spider-Man movies and was 5th place in the animation category for that year. But in spite of its moderate success story, what it really became known for was the way it blended techniques. Up to this point, we'd seen a lot of traditionally animated movies that incorporated 3D elements for added effect, or as an animation assist, or to make possible what was previously impossible. But by the time movies switched to being pretty much fully CGI, medium blending more or less disappeared, and Into the Spider-Verse brought it back. It was the first full-length movie to blend 2D techniques into 3D animation, the opposite of what had become so common decades.
No guns. No guns. You can't do that. You can't do that.
Decades earlier. And some say it kicked off the renaissance that influenced the sudden stylistic shift that we see in so much of modern animation. Into the Spider-Verse really did change animation forever. Except it wasn't actually the first 3D movie to incorporate hand-drawn elements and
legal to have, not to shoot.
Mimic traditional animation techniques. The Peanuts movie did that 3 years earlier, and I don't see no Peanuts on no listicle of every hybrid movie, so what gives? Why do people seem to think that hybrid animation started here instead of here? Well, the answer is complicated, but it all starts with, say it with me now, the number of frames per second and the decision of when to switch between animating on 2s or 3s and when to utilize interpolation techniques.
What's a cartoon?
It's frame rates. I'm going to talk about frame rates now.
Yeah, for self-protection, but you can't shoot people. Like, you can't kill them intentionally.
There should be a very obvious difference between this and this. Both are animated in 3D, but the one on the left feels way more cartoonish, and that's because the only frames you see are the ones that I posed manually. The hand on the right used all the same poses, but with interpolation enabled. That means the movements between all the poses were calculated by software and blended together with some added motion blur. The industry standard for film and TV is to display 24 images, or frames, per second. To put that into perspective, that means in a hand-drawn, traditionally animated cartoon, somebody had to draw 24 new images for a single second of video. That's called animating on ones, and it's an insane amount of work. But even the smoothest, most fluid animation you've ever seen will skip drawings as needed, because your brain is really good at filling in the gaps. A new drawing every other frame is called animating on 2s, a drawing every 3 is called animating on 3s, 4 is on 4s. You get it. Hand-drawn animation will regularly switch between 1s and 2s and 3s based on the kind of motion they want to convey. It's usually more of a stylistic decision than a cost-cutting measure. The decision of when to make a new drawing and when to hold on to an existing one is called frame pacing. So essentially, the best way to make a 3D animation look like 2D is to use poses without interpolation, with pacing on 2s and 3s and using action lines instead of motion blur. And if I've done my job right, hopefully you'll be surprised when I do this. If you really want to sell the effect, it's not just a matter of timing. You also need to flatten out the lighting and shading. So let's take a look at some fellow, much bigger than me YouTubers.
Oh, let me just see. Here. Or, no, let's see that. Okay.
Savannah XYZ might move like a cartoon, but is obviously a 3D model, where the super fluid Doodly has a cartoony outline and flat monochrome colors. If you combine the two styles, you've got yourself a very convincing 3D guy who looks like he's hand-drawn, but isn't, if I do say so myself. We have a behind-the-scenes video up on our Patreon that goes into a little more depth on how we got it working, which you can check out for free. YouTube is not my full-time job, but it does eat up basically all of my free time. So if you want to support what we do here, that's the best place to do.
I don't know. I haven't touched that. Let me open Blender. Don't know if we need one right now. The big dude. The 3D one? Oh, you mean okay. That one. I don't know. Don't know if we need it right now. because I feel like it's going only to be for fun. I don't know if we're not making an anime off of that yet, so I don't know. Should we? Should we make one or not? Hmm.
Do it. Just throwing that out there. Also, like and subscribe and stuff.
Cam Wing. It is I, sponsorship horse.
Sponsorship horse? Couldn't have just knocked?
It was urgent. Your personal information is all over the internet. I'm here to tell you about Incogni.
Incogni? I'm already using them. And they're sponsoring this video.
Oh.
This is gonna sound like I'm exaggerating, but I used to get 3 to 4 political spam texts every single day. And since I registered my YouTube channel as a business, the amount of junk mail practically doubled. Once Incogni started scrubbing my personal info, it pretty much stopped being an issue. Actually, come to think of it, how did you find my apartment? How did you find my apartment? Data brokers are able to buy and sell your personal info whether you know it or not. And nothing bad has ever happened because of that. These brokers are required to remove your info upon request, which is where Incogni comes in. It just takes a couple minutes to sign up, and pretty much immediately they'll start sending requests to have your info removed on your behalf. You could do this yourself, but there are hundreds of brokers, which is why Incogni gives you a handy little estimate of how much time you saved by letting them do it for you. That's time you could spend on important stuff, like patching a giant hole in your wall.
I'm the government of USA.
When you're ready to get started, you can visit incogni.com/camwing to get 60% off an annual plan.
Why do you invite me here if you're just gonna do the whole ad by yourself?
I didn't invite you. Take your personal info off the market and directly support the channel while doing it by visiting incogni.com/camwing or by clicking the link in the description. Coming back to Into the Spider-Verse, what I'm about to say should be pretty obvious. The characters in this movie are animated almost exclusively on 2s and 3s. This is the main method they use to make it feel more cartoonish, even though it obviously is rendered in 3D. If they use any interpolation, it's
I didn't invite you. What? What does that mean? Invelt?
very sparingly. Pretty much every pose was handcrafted one frame at a time, like a stop animation movie. In addition to that, they use a lot of heavily exaggerated poses to emphasize the force and
Invite
speed
where?
of the motion. Like in this scene, in a single pose, he goes from
Huh? Invite what? Huh? Oh, the sponsor. Yeah, yeah. The horse.
Seated to standing with his fists raised. He gets a couple poses of wind-up, then on ones, wha-bam! He punches the car and holds it for 2 frames. They added a motion smear, but only to the second one, which conveys a sense of speed when nothing else is changing. But let's go back a couple frames and look at the car. There's a sort of after image of it trailing behind. Those are called multiples, and you'll see them in the next frame when it starts flying away in the opposite direction. You can barely notice these things in motion, it's literally blink and you'll miss it, but all of these little details added up are why it feels so cartoony. Smears and multiples are used to convey movement in cartoons, but most importantly, these same techniques are used in comics, which the Peanuts movie used to very faithfully mimic the newspaper strip it was based on. After winding up, he throws the snowball, but instead of a smear, we get these 2 motion lines, like in the comic. When the ball comes flying back at him, it only takes 2 frames to pass from the left to the right, knocking him in the air in the process. A lot of motion in not a lot of frames. So we've got the same exaggerated posing, motion lines, hand-drawn facial features, animation on 2s, and both movies even use comic book action words. The Peanuts movie was a huge step in the direction of bringing back the sense of cartoonishness to 3D movies, but it still latched on to that Pixar look. The realistic lighting and shading, the simulated hair, the stylized but mostly photorealistic environments. Into the Spider-Verse threw all of that out the window. Lighting and shading are much sharper, textures are exaggerated and messy, they feel more hand-painted. Hair is still simulated, but it reacts to the light like a drawing. If Peanuts was lightly mimicking traditional techniques, Spider-Verse took that mimicry and turned it up a couple notches. But you can still easily tell where 3D and 2D start and end. It doesn't quite blur the lines in the same way that the Great Mouse Detective's clock tower sequence does, but it isn't trying to. The contrasting styles are a conscious decision because they wanted this movie to look different. Both Peanuts and Into the Spider-Verse clearly hybridize 3D rendering with 2D animation techniques, but the reason this one gets all the credit for forcing animation to evolve and breaking the rules of 3D animation is because of what it didn't do. It didn't look like anything else. Hybrid animation obviously did not start here. It didn't even start this century. But when everything else before it kinda looked the same, all it took was for one movie to look like nothing else to make everybody realize, wait, this rocks. Let's start doing that. And then they did. Into the Spider-Verse proved to studio executives that movies are allowed to look like whatever they wanted, and that audiences responded well to taking risks. I mean, not always, but sometimes they do. So, in 2021, Sony Pictures Animation produced The Mitchells vs. the Machines, and since it was made by the same studio, it was made by a lot of the same people who made Into the Spider-Verse, including the same producers and most of the same visual designers, so it uses a lot of the same techniques and animation style, which means I don't have a ton to add here other than it's really good and you should watch it. But in 2022, DreamWorks released The Bad Guys. 3D animation had always allowed for highly detailed character design, the kind of thing which would have been a nightmare to animate traditionally, but The Bad Guys inverted that philosophy, where characters were designed with simplicity as the goal, like they were originally meant to be animated with pencil and paper. The characters hold on to key poses for longer and quickly snap from one to the other. You'll see shots with backgrounds that look hand-painted, but as the camera moves through them, you can tell that it's stylized CGI. Dust and smoke effects are simulated at a lower frame rate with sharp lighting to look as flat and hand-drawn as possible. Most characters have a set of individual teeth, but when the animators want to exaggerate a specific emotion, they'll swap out the models for a big, toothy grin or an angry, pointy snarl. What makes The Bad Guys look so distinct isn't that they tried to pull elements of hand-drawn animation into a CGI movie, because there's really not a lot of that. It's in the way they integrated classical animation techniques into their 3D animation pipeline. They found a way to make it feel like a hand-drawn cartoon without exactly looking like one. Actually, now that I say that, I guess it's not really a hybrid, but it looks cool. And DreamWorks was on a roll because their next theatrical release was Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, a sequel that nobody asked for to a movie that nobody liked. Aside from the fact that it even exists, the most absurd part is that it's, like, really good. In terms of animation, they went in a bit of a different direction than The Bad Guys, since this is technically a spin-off of Shrek. So instead of upping the cartoonishness, they leaned into a painterly storybook style, where the environments look like they came straight out of an illustration, which is a nice callback to the original movie it's based on. Most of the characters are animated just like any other 3D movie, with smooth interpolation, but it's all about the details. Their hair looks like it was scribbled with pencil. The eyes don't reflect light, so they look flat and hand-painted. And certain features are accentuated with line work. But where it gets cool is when the story takes us to an action sequence. It's like a switch is flipped and suddenly the motions are exaggerated, with posing on 2s and 3s, with smear frames and action lines. Then once the scene starts to calm back down, the frame rate returns to where it was, like a signal to the audience that things are under control. The movie enters cartoon mode when they fight, and it goes back to storybook mode when things are calm. It's a very cool effect. Peanuts, Spider-Verse, Mitchells vs. the Machines, The Bad Guys, and Puss in Boots are all very different movies that managed to capture a lot of the same feeling, and that came from the similar ways they chose to mimic traditional animation styles. In an industry where there's a term for just about everything, surprisingly there isn't a name for this particular technique, but I think stylistic mimicry makes the most sense. The decision to pull traditional techniques into 3D movies feels very new because it is. The goal of blending mediums together was to draw attention to it, to make it stand out. But back in the 80s, when Disney pulled 3D techniques into their traditional movies, they were shooting for what I'm going to call stylistic uniformity, where you don't even realize that the hand-drawn cartoon you're watching has elements of CGI hiding underneath it. Their goal at the time was to blur the lines and ensure that the average viewer wasn't going to be able to tell what parts were rendered in what way. Like Prince Eric's ship in The Little Mermaid. If you know what you're looking for, you can tell it's 3D, but in 1989 it wouldn't have screamed CGI to the average audience member. By the time The Emperor's New Groove released in the year 2000, Disney had really gotten that down to a science. In this scene, Kuzco and Pacha, who are both hand-drawn, were tied to a CGI log, which looks so seamless that I'd bet most of you didn't notice it was 3D until I pointed it out. They do this with a number of props throughout the movie, and as somebody who watched it over and over as a kid, I'm actually kind of shocked I didn't know about this until now, which means they totally nailed it. In a primarily hand-drawn movie, animation teams will make an effort to uniformly blend 3D animation into it, but the inverse sounds nearly impossible. If your movie is primarily animated in 3D, how would you seamlessly add hand-drawn elements in a way that nobody will notice? Well, that's exactly what Arcane did. Watching this, you would be forgiven for assuming that everything you see here was just stylized CGI, like what these movies did. And the characters definitely are. In the earlier examples, I talk about backgrounds that look hand-painted, but you could tell they were 3D when the camera started moving. But in Arcane, they actually did hand-paint all these backgrounds, and surprisingly, it was done as a cost-cutting measure. As a Netflix streaming series, Arcane has 9 episodes that constitute around 6 hours of animation, where animated movies are usually less than 2, and they don't have a movie budget, so they needed to find a way to make more with less. Shots like this, with the level of detail on display, would have taken a 3D artist weeks to model, texture, and light everything, but if you're only going to see it from 1 or 2 different angles, a painter could make static backgrounds with a similar level of detail in just a couple days. There's a really great video that breaks it down quite nicely.
Same thing here. They don't need to 3D model anything here. They just need a painting and project that painting into those layouts. And then they need some shadow catchers so they can later composite with the 3D characters.
In their efforts to save as much time and money as possible, they created a whole new visual aesthetic. Enter Galactic used a lot of the same techniques, but instead of projecting the backgrounds onto 3D geometry, they stayed as static hand-painted images, like what they used to do in traditional cartoons. The main characters are always 3D, but the background elements could be just a moving image. It's hard to tell what mediums are being used and when. Stylistic uniformity is all about invisible blending. The uses of mixed mediums should come together so seamlessly that you either don't notice it's there or it becomes difficult to tell which medium is which. Stylistic mimicry is all about making one medium look like another, but they aren't necessarily trying to mask the fact that it's there. Like, sure, Into the Spider-Verse might capture the feeling of hand-drawn animation, but it's obviously just mimicking it. You can tell it's all CGI. When Moses parts the Red Sea in The Prince of Egypt, the water is definitely computer-generated, but they weren't aiming for a photorealistic simulation. It's stylized and exaggerated, and the effect helps to establish a sense of grandiosity. It feels impossible and miraculous, which is the point. In Atlantis: The Lost Empire, you can tell that practically every vehicle is rendered in 3D, whether they're cars, ships, or a skyscraper-sized submarine. And the different rendering techniques highlight how inhuman and mechanical everything is. It shows off the sense of scale in a very imposing way. It's used to the same effect in The Iron Giant. Having the title character rendered in a different medium from everything else is not only part of the style, it's part of the story, to show how he doesn't belong and why everybody is understandably scared of him. Even though he doesn't fit in the world, he very seamlessly interacts with the world. Klaus does something
you eat.
Extremely unique. Where the bulk of the movie is traditionally animated, one hand-drawn frame at a time, but it was lit and shaded using 3D rendering techniques. This allows for characters' eyes to have realistic reflections or diffuse light on their skin. They developed a set of custom machine learning algorithms specifically designed to make their cartoon mimic CGI. Insider broke it all down in a behind-the-scenes video that I highly recommend watching after you finish this one. It's some very cool stuff. After Spider-Verse opened the floodgates in 2018, it only took a few short years for Nickelodeon and Paramount to follow suit with what might be the hybrid movie that's ever been made. I didn't grow up with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. In fact, the only tidbits I ever picked up about it just came through cultural osmosis. Having no particular attachment to the franchise, I can't say I set my expectations for a new TMNT movie especially high until I saw the first trailer. People have accused it of just copying the Spider-Verse style, but those people are stupid. And if you are one of those people, I'm going to prove to you that you're stupid. This movie is animated on 2s and 3s like Spider-Verse, but everything, and I mean everything, looks like it came straight out of a sketchbook. Diffused background lighting bleeds like watercolor. Light sources in view of the camera, like the headlights of a car or an overhead street lamp, use scribbled lines instead of simulated glare. In fact, if I could describe the design motif of this entire movie in 2 words, it would be scribbled line work, because it is everywhere. Particle effects, reflections on glasses or glare from a movie screen, action lines during fast movement. When the camera quickly pans, we don't get motion blur, everything in frame gets scribbly. Fur and hair looks like it was drawn on. But it isn't just the visual effects. The 3D geometry of the world is messy and asymmetrical. There's a very hand-drawn irregularity to all of the models. The handles and vents on these locker doors are all slightly different shapes. The hallway is rectangular, but the lines aren't perfectly straight, and it's like this everywhere they go. Human characters in particular are modeled with an asymmetry to them, like they were hastily doodled in a few seconds. The turtles were raised by their dad to be scared of humanity, to avoid interacting with them at all costs, and most of them are designed with this funky ugliness to them, except for April O'Neil, the one human character who accepted the turtles for who they were and the first friendship they ever formed. I'm not going to spoil anything here, but by the end of the movie, as they gain a better understanding of them, the human characters take on much friendlier designs. It's subtle, but it's a really nice touch. The art style is what drew me into it, but the story is fantastic. I kind of can't believe how much I love this movie. In the way they mimic 2D animation techniques, they were able to uniformly blend everything together completely seamlessly. So I wouldn't stick Mutant Mayhem into the stylistic mimicry or stylistic uniformity buckets, because it's both. The problem with covering such a broad topic is that no single script will ever be able to do it justice. There was a lot more I wanted to talk about. I ended up cutting almost 20 extra minutes just to get this video to a reasonable length. And I barely even mentioned anime. There are some insanely cool examples. If this video does well enough, I'd definitely like to revisit.
Hey, Kimwing?
What's up?
You put smiling friends in the thumbnail?
Yeah? So?
Spend 25 minutes. Why haven't you talked about it?
Oh, yeah. I should probably do that. Since I'm apparently in the business of categorizing and naming stuff, there's a third hybrid animation style that you really don't see that often, which I call stylistic dissonance. The objective wasn't ever to blend things together, it was to highlight the contrast between blatantly unmatched aesthetics in the same scene. Smiling Friends is a predominantly hand-drawn cartoon, but they'll regularly pull in different characters from entirely different mediums. You mostly see it used for comedic effect, but if they wanted to invoke a sense of fear, they managed to pull that off pretty well too. Quite a few times, actually. Smiling Friends is legitimately kind of scary on multiple occasions.
Okay, I guess I'll just go now.
They go out of their way to make every mixed media character as distinct looking as possible. Gwimbly looks like he came straight out of a PS1 game. Low resolution with jittering Z-buffer and everything. Troglor looks like a PlayStation 6 game with over 1 quadrillion polygons, like a true icon of modern gaming. He's quick, he's smart.
Hey, yeah, no, don't shoot that, please.
But they don't just limit it to CGI. There's a lot of stop animation too.
Living snowman, huh? Alright, I know how to fix this.
If Smiling Friends is hand-drawn at its core, The Amazing World of Gumball is predominantly Okay, actually, I don't know how they made this, but I don't think there's a better example of a show that smashes different styles and mediums together so unapologetically. The photorealistic environments coupled with 2D protagonists and a wide variety of 3D side characters makes for a series with a style that is truly impossible to replicate. Nothing about this world makes any kind of sense, but that is very much the point, which is reflected in its use of mixed mediums, and I definitely did not take any artistic inspiration from them. The mishmash of mismatched styles shows up in a lot of indie animation as well, like on Deadly Comics channel, who is particularly good at this, or on Max G's series Brain Dump, with a 3D animated protagonist and environment with 2D facial features and side characters. And I definitely did not take any artistic inspiration. Thank you to Steve Adderton, Lysandra, NB God of Destruction, Robopuffin, Jocko, Agent Seed, Dement Man, /999, Beatspark, Kinetic Media, William Zorio, Liberty Loves, MK6. $6,900 and C Miles for supporting the channel on Patreon. If you want to see your doodle in the end credits along with these fine folks, plus bonus videos and behind the scenes footage, visit patreon.com.
Okay, I am back. Yes. Yes. Okay. What? So bright. Okay, I guess that helps. Okay, nice. Okay, this is gonna be hard, but let's do this. Attention aware anime line drawing colorization. Automatic colorization anime line drawing has attracted much attention for years. So it gets the entire user hint based methods are the mainstream approach for line drawing colorization, while reference based methods offer a more intuitive approach. Nevertheless, Although reference-based methods can improve feature aggregation of the reference image and the line drawing, the colorization results are not compelling in terms of color consistency or semantic correspondence. In this paper, we introduce an attention-based model for anime line drawing. Okay. Oh. 29 December 2023. This is on 24th February. Let's see. So we got tension-based model for anime line drawing. Huh. Resolution, I guess. Yeah.
I hate it. You hate it. Your grandma hates it. It's the dreaded step right after your sketch, which is sure to look worse than the sketch itself. Line art. I've recently been studying artists like Yona Yamamai, Lamb, Mika Picasso, and yeah, and I've always wondered, how on earth does their line art look so good? The stroke lengths, the smoothness, the variation of the line's thickness all come together to form such a nice treat for the eyes. Well, I tried replicating it to some success, but not much.
I mean, it's alright, like...
Over my drawing career, I've tried many different ways to draw and utilize line art. Some were successful, some weren't. But, so that you don't have to go through the pain I went through, I've compiled as many of these tips as I could into this one video. Line variation, line confidence, and general pen and tablet configurations that will make your life easy.
If you've ever watched any behind-the-scenes footage of films or video games, you've probably seen them use motion capture, using computers and technology to track the movement of actors. You may even wonder why motion capture hasn't replaced animation entirely. Why would studios spend so much time and money to have people animate everything by hand when they could just put a guy in a suit and track his movements? Well, studios did try that, and we'll get to that in a moment. But like most things in animation, it's not quite that simple. In this day and age, motion capture is actually its own entirely separate career path in animation, and a wonderfully fulfilling and creative one at that. It's used in film VFX, streaming avatars, live performances, and video game animation. In film VFX, streaming avatar, live performances, and video game animation. In fact, game animation is one of its most powerful use cases. Take Baldur's Gate 3 for example. Nearly 200 hours of dialogue with full body motion capture for almost every single line. This would be an astronomical task to animate, both labor and expense-wise, but adds an incredible layer of depth to the performances in-game that wouldn't be possible otherwise. But you can't just put someone in a motion capture suit, record their performance, and drop it into the game engine. Someone needs to clean that motion capture up, exaggerating movements, tightening poses, and adding hand and facial animation on top. This is a skill in itself, not to mention those responsible for managing and organizing the pipeline to make this possible. Even when cleanup isn't possible though, motion capture for live performances have seen incredible developments in the past decade. Facial tracking is one thing, but capturing the entire body and mapping it to a virtual character in real time has a near infinite amount of creative possibilities. But it wasn't always this way. Motion capture had been used here and there in the industry for quite some time since the 90s, to varying degrees of success, but it wasn't until the turn of the century when mocap was being used everywhere. The success of motion capture in live-action VFX quickly led to the idea of using it for entire animated films, with the biggest success coming from image movers. Even though none of these films were as successful as other animated films of the time, the potential for motion capture to completely disrupt the animation industry was there, and studio executives noticed. When Disney partnered with Image Movers to create Image Movers Digital and produce even more fully motion capture animated films, it felt like motion capture was slowly replacing handmade animation, rather than being used as a tool alongside animators. You can feel the annoyance and anxiety this caused in the animation industry boiled down in this short film created at CalArts, featuring the likes of James Baxter and a young Alex Hirsch. I recommend watching the whole thing linked in the description below because it's hilarious. But mostly I just want to show how animators at the time were really not happy with motion capture being abused by studios in an attempt to replace animators, just because it was the newest technology. And the silliest part is that motion capture back then required expensive suits, cameras, actors, and gigantic stages, and required cleanup from animators anyways, so studios were often spending more money for a worse result. Now, I'm not saying motion capture is inherently worse than hand-keyed animation. It makes perfect sense if you want to capture complex motion like dancing, or detailed and nuanced performances for realistic animation. That's what it's built to do. When used as a tool in the right places, it can add to the experience. But trying to use it for everything is like trying to build a house out of hammers. If it's used where it's not needed, it can actually detract from the experience. Monster House, for example, is a great film that I think a lot of people, including me, look back on pretty fondly.
But isn't using motion capture the literal antithesis to the film's claymation aesthetic? Can you imagine how much better this film would have been if it was actually animated like a stop-motion film? I don't really seem to be alone in this either, considering most reviews of the film I've read mention how lackluster the animation is, and that's almost entirely due to the use or misuse of motion capture. Was it worth it for a result that looks worse than other animated films of the same time period? Considering Image Mover's digital shut down just a few years later, and there hasn't really been a major film release animated entirely with motion capture since then, probably not. But that's because we learned the best way to apply motion capture as a tool and not a replacement. And over time, the technology became astronomically cheaper and more accessible, to the point where anyone can get a suit and capture performances in their own home, including me, right now. What do you think? Do you like it? This is a live performance with just barely any cleanup on top, done using the Rococo Smart Suit and gloves, which I'll talk about later. The best way I can describe how this looks in terms of animation is like a mascot costume. The animation looks and feels like I'm wearing a costume underneath, because I am. But if animation is all about convincingly recreating movement from real life, why does it look weird? Chuck Jones was once interviewed in the 1970s about realistic animation, and he described Roger from 101 Dalmatians as looking more human than humans do. He believed that even realistic animation should look like Roger's because animation should exaggerate real life, rather than just imitate it. But motion capture doesn't exaggerate. My proportions are heavily stylized and exaggerated, but my animation is more muted and understated. There's a disconnect between the two that makes things feel off. This is what was missing in Monster House's animation. The animation was fine, but that's all it is. It's not more human than human in any way. It's just human. It doesn't fit the claymation-like visuals, which are exaggerated. And just so we're clear, when I say exaggerated, I don't mean I want their eyes popping out of their head like Looney Tunes. What I mean is that it feels floaty and stiff. It's not exaggerated in a way that emphasizes good timing and key poses like hand-keyed animation would. Motion capture creates highly detailed animation that works great for human characters, but tends to feel distracting and awkward for cartoony characters because they aren't proportioned like human characters. There's that disconnect, hence why this feels weird. And it's also why modern CGI creatures like Rocket Raccoon are not motion captured. He's not proportioned like a human, he's proportioned like a raccoon. So he's animated entirely by hand. They have actors on set for reference and eye lines, but none of that data gets used. He's just there to help actors act, and the footage later helps animators animate. However, that doesn't mean cartoon characters with mascot-like movement have no value. After all, everyone loves mascot costumes, including me. Here's me meeting Shrek at Universal and his big rubber hands weighing down on my head. In fact, when I told you that I'm literally capturing this movement myself in real time and showed you what that looked like, you probably thought it looked fun. There's a talent to performing, and a delight from seeing a larger-than-life character move and interact with people. Where that tends to fall apart, in my opinion, is when you record it by itself with nothing else, and then try to say it's equivalent to a movie or a TV show. We know it's a costume character, yet it's being sold the same as everything else in that medium. Not to say costume characters don't work in film or TV, obviously there's fantastic and famous examples of excellent costumes and puppetry in all mediums. What I mean is, studios were practically taking the guy in the Shrek costume and saying that's Shrek 5. Obviously that's not going to work. You could use motion capture as a starting point for animators and then clean it up so it looks good enough for film, but at that point you'd probably have a better result for the same price by just hiring an animator. But it's also exactly why mocap works in a live performance. It's fun to see people perform as characters, because the expectations are more straightforward. We obviously don't hold live performances to the same standard as film, and the digital costume allows for way more creative possibilities than a real-life costume ever could, as evidenced by everything the VTuber community has been doing for the past decade. It's the digital equivalent of a mascot costume. or a professional wrestler persona. Obviously, people know it's a character, but that doesn't mean the audience can't play along with the kayfabe. And as motion capture gets cheaper and more accessible, we now arrive at the point where anyone can do motion capture right at their own home, which is what I've been doing this whole time. So let's talk about that. I'm using the Rococo Smart Suit Pro 2. The smart gloves, and the head rig, which were all sent to me by Rococo for free alongside the Coil Pro, which I'll talk about in a moment. Even though they sent all this to me for free, I'm not required to say anything specific, positive or negative, so consider this a mini review. Just keep in mind this is all prosumer tech, so it's cheaper than paying entire studios and actors for mocap, but still expensive for most people, and I got it for free, so that's naturally going to influence my opinion a bit. The smart suit is light, fits well, and is pretty comfortable. It's really easy to set up in Rococo's software and super accurate, and considering you don't need any external cameras or devices to get a full performance, it's pretty impressive. Compared to motion capture of yesteryear, which required entire studios full of capture devices and suits covered in markers, it's pretty nuts to have it all live in the suit. My only complaint is that it requires an external battery bank to power, which wasn't super clear up front. For a bundle advertised as full motion capture, there should probably be a battery not included label near the buy button. But there is a pocket for the battery, so at least the battery can live inside the suit. The smart gloves are also a great fit and are very comfortable. They're obviously a little overkill for Doodly since he has orb hands, but if you want to know how accurate they can be, check this out. Ooh, fingers. You need to have the smart gloves connected to the smart suit to track your hand's position and rotation, but if you don't want to wear the full suit, you can get the Coil Pro instead. The smart gloves combined with the Coil Pro and facial tracking with the head rig allow for waist-up motion capture without a suit, which makes sense for VTubers. However, I'm not convinced it's the best setup for everybody. The gloves are a little too bulky to play video games with or use a keyboard, and the Coil Pro is pretty pricey at $2,000. In my opinion, Rococo's tech is probably overkill for VTubers and artists working alone like me. Getting in and out of the suit, gloves, and head rig to stream or record a video is a lot to ask for when an iPhone and an Ultraleap is all you need for a VTuber setup. However, for indie developers and small studios, Rococo's solution to motion capture is super simple and way cheaper compared to professional motion capture. We're talking a couple grand for everything I used right at home, versus tens of thousands of dollars for professional mocap in a studio. Frankly, I couldn't be more happy with how accessible and cheap motion capture is these days, and how well it integrated into the industry as a tool. But in order to get there, it had to go through a cycle of executives attempting to replace everything with it, and then finding out why that's a bad idea. That actually sounds kind of familiar. Oh no. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I can't help but see the similarities between the early adoption of motion capture in the 2000s and now the early adoption of AI. How studios and executives see it as the future of everything and replace the work of humans with it, despite the massive costs and low quality. Setting aside the massive plagiarism and ethics issues with AI here, this is what it boils down to for me. Audiences can tell when something lacks a soul. They were able to tell when motion capture tried to replace hand-keyed animation, and as much as studios want you to believe this isn't the case, yes, they can tell with AI, and they don't like it. Yet, studios try to replace humans with it anyways. They see cost savings that don't exist once you actually dig deeper, and they think audiences won't be able to tell the difference. This isn't to say that AI is going to integrate into the entertainment industry and become a career path like motion capture did. I have no idea what's going to happen with AI, except that it's currently being integrated in the dumbest way possible by having it draw for you, which isn't useful to any artist. I wouldn't wish a career doing that on my worst enemy, but that's not the point of this video. What I'm really trying to say is that we've been here before.
Yeah.
The entertainment industry is going through it for a lot of reasons, AI just being one of them. But back in the early 2000s, a lot of animators were out of a job because people thought motion capture was going to replace everything. You saw that short film from CalArts. People were terrified of motion capture. Studios poured money into it as the next big technology, and then audiences realized they didn't want it. Then animators found work again, technology improved, and integrated itself in ways that were actually useful to artists, and animation has never been in a better place since until very recently. I'm a fairly optimistic guy, so maybe this is a rose-tinted way of seeing things, but what I hope your takeaway from this video is, motion capture didn't replace animation, and AI won't replace it either.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching.
Okay. Agreed. Surely would help though. Not replace, but help and assist.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh well, let's keep working. Let's see. We got sample images. 256. Reference color and generate the color result. Left to right. Have the resolution, line drawing, reference color, and it is applied. It's kind of blend though. I'm assuming that's also because of part of the data that was trained on, and also the resolution because it's very, very small. 256 is nothing. It's like 256 times 256 was like 65,000, and compared to like the normal Full HD resolution, that's 1920 times 1080. Dividing by that, it's like yeah, it's like 31 times bigger. So that's big. Um, yeah, definitely not going to cut it. Image colorization obstructed extensive research. Yeah, according to degenerated as conditional image to image. Okay, we want video. We want a reference, but also the character motion. So if we look at if I look at this, for example, it's gonna be this one. Oh shoot! God, that was not supposed to happen. Supposed to be here. No, not that one. This one. Oh, I move it out. God, I didn't mean to. Yeah, so it's supposed to be like this. See if I can open that up. Imagine that's different layers, and you would have the character, and also, yeah. Potentially that one as well, I guess. Yeah. I haven't thought about the shadow as much, but like flat color should be fine. I don't know how they would apply to dark color, or shadows. Okay. Let's see. So, okay, in this paper we propose a novel conditional adversarial colorization network combining convolutional attention and self-gradient attention, trained fully on anime line drawing. Line art drawing dataset. What is that? What is that? SNIS 17 anime sketch colorization pair, and that is a dataset anime sketch. I guess that's images, maybe. That could be cool. There's 6 GB. It's not a lot though. I can download a zip 12 GB. Do I have 12 GB? I think I do. Okay, let's download it. If I can download it as zip, I would. Two hours left. Let's just let it download, and we'll see that later. Okay, so if she's doing a small data set, that's one. And two, low resolution. And it's only on images. We first designed a line drawing extraction network based on this dataset, which can be used to augment more data. Then we train our colorization model through a proxy task of line drawing guided distorted image restoration. The encoder equipped with the convolutional attention module is introduced to help the encoder extract multi-scale features. Therefore, the colorization result of our model have both geometry details and accurate colors. Meanwhile, the stop gradient attention module shows great feature aggregation performance and gives our model better semantic correspondence. With the attention-based network, we can generate color results which are comparable to manual coloring results. See an example in Figure 1. Our main contributions can be summarized as follows. Yeah, it seems like it works. Doesn't seem like the color is overflowing as well. Like that's good. I wonder if we can do something like this. To be honest, I don't even know this is. Let's see if we can adjust that. I will change the stream to be in software, I guess, because I feel like that's more what it is. Maybe. Software and game development. Yeah, feels like it. And then you have, let me drop this. And we'll also have, yeah, that's anime. And I think that should be updated. Yeah. That should be fine. We propose a novel conditional adversarial colorization network combining convolutional attention module and stop gradient attention module trained fully on animation line drawing dataset. We first design a line drawing extraction network, based on this dataset, which can be used to augment more data. Then we train our colorization module through a proxy task of line drawing guided distorted image. The encoder equip is introduced to help the encoder extract multi-scale features. Therefore, the colorization results of our module have both geometry details and accurate colors. Meanwhile, stop gradient attention module shows great feature aggregation performance and give our model better semantic correspondence ability. With the attention-based network, we can generate color results. Is that a unit-based network to extract line drawing from color images to simulate manually drawn ones? Okay. Available anime line drawing paired dataset is limited. We can use this model to extend the number of current data. Good. Okay. We develop an anime line drawing colorization methods based on attention-aware mechanism by integrating convolutional attention module and stop gradient attention module, so as to improve the color consistency and semantic correspondence. Both qualitative and quantitative comparative analysis shows our method has outperformed other reference-based states of the art methods in the task of anime line drawing colorization via training on a proxy task. This is fairly new, right? Like 2023. There's been a few. I don't know. There's a lot, but like a few more papers, I guess. Related work. Method. Given a line drawing and a reference color image, our network can generate a color result which contains clear geometry structure of the line drawing and accurate semantic color of the reference image. We formulate the problem as a novel conditional adversarial network in which the training process itself is regarded as line drawing guided distorted reference color image restoration. As shown in figure 2, inspired by 14, we train our model in a self-augmented, simplified manner. Enabling the network to be trained on limited paired data, the trained model can perform reference-based colorization for other line drawing inputs. Okay. Scan is like an upscaler. I think least square generative adversarial network. Okay. You got here. Basically, you got the image, which we extract out the line art. The line art is used to train the model again, I guess. We need to extract out the line art using a model. We use that line art to then train the network to be given a reference and to so that's what we want to do, right? Yeah, for sure. Same subject, different subject. Depends. Training pipeline of our network. G is error result. Original color images. They don't even release. That's kind of annoying. Don't think they even released that. Absolutely. Baseline drawing. 20 March. Dawn images. Good idea though. Not bad. Nine. User interface. So you got a reference that you want to use, and then there's your line art for colorizing. It's okay. I mean, that works. Simple, easy to use. Problem is, oh, I see. Is that Neovim? What? Okay. Doesn't seem like. Oh, okay. Not cool. Not cool. Get the gist of it though. Mm-hmm. Far from it now. So I guess we got this one. I already saved that. 3 days ago. Oh, I got new papers. Let me look at this. This is their paper. And we got a survey as well. Yeah. We got a survey and we got a paper. Layer specific control. What does that mean? Interesting. This is pretty new. Pretty new.
In this video, we introduce our work layer animate.
Okay, that doesn't make sense.
In this video, we introduce our work layer animate, layer-specific control for animation. Layer is a fundamental concept to animation, which allows the separate handling of backgrounds, characters, and special effects, preventing unintended alterations across elements. However, layer-specific data is scarce compared to real-world videos due to its commercial value. Therefore, we must first design a layer curation pipeline to extract layer data from animations. Here we present a clip from an animation as an example to introduce our layer curation pipeline. We employ SAM to segment the element masks in the first frame of the clip. Then these masks serve as prompts, which are then propagated to successive frames using SAM2, forming temporally continuous masklets. To address the over-segmentation issue, we introduce motion state hierarchical merging to merge these masklets based on their motion states, which are estimated by averaging optical flow across the temporal dimension. In motion state hierarchical merging, layers with similar motion scores are merged from the bottom up until the layer count falls below the capacity and the motion score difference exceeds the threshold. Finally, we obtain the curated layer masks of the animation clip. With the curated layers, we implement motion state allocation to separate dynamic and static layers to prepare layer guidance. We allocate the reference static layers to all non-reference frames. For dynamic layers, we allocate 0 images to those frames. Then the allocated layer regions are encoded with a VAE encoder, and we concatenate the resized layer masks to indicate valid condition areas. In the framework, we utilize layer-specific motion information to provide motion control. Here, we use scores as motion information. Not only that, sketches can also be utilized for this purpose, which is demonstrated in the latter part of the video. The layer latents and motion information are combined and fed into layer control net to guide the denoising unit. To demonstrate the versatility of Layer Animate, we conduct comparisons across 4 video generation tasks under different conditions and within several representative scenes, including image to video to create particle effects, image to video with sketch for generating light effects, particle effects, image to video with sketch for generating light effects, interpolation to make smoke appear out of nowhere, and interpolation with sketch to achieve a fade in visual style. Layer Animate enhances fine-grained control over animation layers, offering many innovative and user-friendly control options. In the image to video task, if users wish certain elements in the image to remain unchanged, such as the boy, they can explicitly fix that layer to keep the boy stationary. With our layer-specific control, users are only required to provide partial sketches for dynamic layers without the need for conditions on static ones. Furthermore, partial sketches for dynamic with our layer-specific control, users are only required to provide partial sketches for dynamic layers without the need for conditions on static ones. Furthermore, the static background can be switched with different scenes, enabling dynamic layers to appear in user-desired backgrounds. For example, we can move the girl from inside the room to a picturesque setting among blossom trees. Setting among blossom trees. In interpolation with sketch task, Layer Animate can interpolate the different backgrounds for smooth transitions while controlling foreground layers based on partial sketch guidance. Since layers are independently encoded within Layer ControlNet, our foreground layers are nearly unaffected by the background. Moreover, we present more qualitative results to demonstrate the effectiveness and versatility of Layer Animate in animation quality. Thanks for watching.
Don't know.